All right, welcome to Buzz Beat. Thanks for joining us again for another episode. This is Richie, and we have a fun episode lined up today as we will be chatting about the Hornets, their off season, and kind of moving forward into the beginning of the season, as well as ending with a fantasy draft at the end of the episode. We are live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter video. Joining me today, I've met this guy in person at a Hornets game a couple times. I've had his dad on the podcast, so you've got some big shoes to fill here. But we've got Gil McGregor, a fellow Hornets fan, a Panthers fan, and a Braves fan. I'm not a Wake fan, but we've got three of those in common. How's it going?
Pretty good. 3 out of 4 is not bad, and I definitely have seeing my dad's size 17s laying around. They're huge shoes to fill, literally. But hopefully, I would think we're probably one of the first father-son duos on here. So, honored to say that we could have that honor too.
Actually, you're not Gil. I just thought of
Not
this.
the first.
No, PJ, and Paul Washington have been
Okay,
on here.
there you go.
So
Okay, so
yeah,
the
the
second
second.
duo. I'll
Yes.
take it. I'll take it. I'll take it.
So yeah, he came on and he reminisced about those early '90s teams. He talked about the game-winning shot in '93, and it was awesome to hear his side because he obviously experienced it firsthand. And we're a little bit too young for that, so we could only go back and watch YouTube clips and stuff of that nature. But let's get into the Hornets. Just generally speaking, I know this is kind of a wide open question. What did you think of the Hornets? Off season, and did it really move the needle enough for you? Were there moves that you liked, disliked? Like, what would you have done differently?
It's interesting because it was kind of quiet,
Yeah.
so to speak. When the draft is the highlight of your off season, so to speak, a lot of times that doesn't necessarily move the needle for people, especially when people are kind of torn over the draft selection with Brandon Miller. But I think that in the instance or in this case, the Hornets, I think quiet can be good. I think that a lot of moves were made in the margins. They were very active, with Brandon Miller, but also, adding Nick Smith Jr. And obviously the big one is bringing back Miles Bridges with the qualifying offer. That is essentially adding another player who knows where his conditioning is. He hasn't played basketball in a year, and obviously I'd be remiss not to acknowledge the circumstances surrounding his return can make fans, feel different types of ways about it. So I understand that as well. So it really was a big offseason of kind of taking care of home, drafting for fit and drafting for need, and also bringing back PJ Washington, making sure he was good, and then the one free agent addition, Frank Ntilikina. It's kind of taking a chance on something that could play out, because I feel like that was kind of a similar conversation we would have about Dennis Smith Jr. last year. Taking a flyer on somebody and kind of giving them one last shot for a guy who's playing to extend their career. So it's interesting. I think that it's how you build, through the draft and build through the homegrown talent. So I guess kind of wait and see now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, the fact that the PJ signing took forever, like you just
Yeah,
didn't know what
yeah,
was going to take place there. But I do think the priority this offseason was re signing Miles. And I guess to a certain extent, re sign PJ, even though they
mhm,
played hardball with him. And I guess
right.
they played hardball with Miles as well because of the situation. But to me, I think the biggest disappointment, and you named him, was not retaining DSJ.
Mhm,
And yeah, you can take a flyer on Ntilikina, but at least you know what you had with
right,
DSJ with the rim pressure and the perimeter defense. And most importantly, like he just went to the Nets for such a little amount of money.
right.
So I'm just like, what was going on there? Like they just didn't prioritize him. Like he just didn't feel wanted. Like what would be the reasoning DSJ would leave? I mean, that's really the only reason I can think of.
Yeah, that was curious to me too, because like you said, when he moved on, I was expecting it to be like, oh, okay, they didn't want it to do that, or it didn't necessarily match the vision. But as we saw last year, it was a perfect fit, and he really did kind of rejuvenate his career here. He's close to home, being a guy from Fayetteville, so it kind of felt like everything aligned for him to kind of stay and just be a small building block type piece for the team moving forward. So now it leaves a big void for all the reasons that you outlined, and I'm really curious to how that looks this upcoming season.
What do you think it happens with Ubre? Like who? I mean, he's not really been linked with a lot of teams.
It's so weird. Like, it's again dragging out, and I think that kind of speaks to everything that's happened. We talked about the hardball with PJ, talked about, DSJ just kind of moving on inexplicably almost, and now Kelly Oubre again is another guy. Like it's almost like the free agents in Charlotte just have a weird market attached to them. And I've seen his name like just mentioned, but not necessarily like you said it align with any specific team. Just like, oh yeah, Kelly Oubre is still out there, and he showed to have value, what he does. But it's just I'm curious to see if it's like the type of thing that sorts out, 2 weeks before training camp, because he's a veteran. I could see a team doing that, but maybe it's just a matter of the financials or what he thinks his fit should be. But
Right.
it's kind of weird.
Yeah. With the money drying up and teams making their moves, like
Yeah.
Kelly Oubre might be at the mercy of any kind of offer that comes his
Right.
way. So when you look at this roster, when you look at the coaching, when you look at the moves that they made heading into the season, what would you say is your biggest concern for this team, or two?
Yeah, I was gonna say the first one we talked about, stems with that absence of Dennis Smith Jr. Now, who's going to fill that void, right? Who's going to be the person that comes in when LaMelo takes a break? Who's going to be the guy who comes off the bench? Are you going to rely on Terry to kind of be lead the offense when LaMelo's not on the floor? Is it going to be somebody that you trust? And we saw it during summer league, right? Like there was not really any true playmaking on that roster. There's not anybody coming up the system that they can kind of lean on as far as that goes. So I'm really concerned about that. Last year was about as bad as it could possibly be as far as injuries go. So hopefully this team can stay healthy again. But if injuries happen, you need to have depth. So I'm curious, similar to what we said about Kelly Oubre, is there a depth signing out there that they're looking to make, when training camp comes around? They kind of shovel some things around and make some numbers work on the roster. So that's a big concern. And I'm also curious about the front court depth. I know last year, we were very interested to see what the young guys could do. That trio or quartet of young guys in the front court. Saw some flashes from all of them at certain points, but now it's like, can we get sustained things from those guys in order to just kind of take a big step forward and really establish this team and build as you want to build around a young star and budding superstar in LaMelo.
Yeah, it's funny the front court situation. There's been seasons past where you just have no idea what's going on at
Mhm.
the center rotation. But at least this year, that Mark Williams is kind of
Yeah.
coming into the job, starting job to lose. You've got Nick Richards, who recently signed that extension. I've always had this conversation with some of my co-hosts on the podcast. Like, what are your thoughts on, I guess not just centers, but just players in general? Like, I feel like Mark Williams and Nick Richards have a similar play style. I
Mhm.
mean, I think Mark Williams is definitely more impactful, but
Yeah.
like sometimes I wonder if having a change up, a switch up in the backup center role could throw, teams for a loop sometimes. But like having the same exact player, maybe there's some continuity like aspect to that's an advantage. But, do you have any thoughts on the fact that these guys are basically the same mold?
Yeah, there's two ways of looking at it, right? And I think that's an interesting way to kind of approach the topic, where it's like, okay, guys who can be rim protecting, rim threats, because rim runners, rim
Right.
lob threats. I think that's kind of what we've seen the league, I guess, really prioritize, is guys who can protect the rim, guys who can finish above the rim, or you're a stretch five. It seems like there's like no real in between right now in today's game. So it's like, do you really find yourself as a team who's going to impose the way that you want to play night in and night out? And I feel like a team like the Hornets, who are looking to be an up and comer, I don't think they can afford to impose their will. I think they kind of need to adjust. So I do think it would help to have, a stretch five type guy, to kind of have some variance, because one night might call for a certain style and a different night or a different 10 to 12-minute spot in the game could call for that as well. So, that's something that I'm curious about, if that's something that they maybe try to find moving forward, whether it's, on the secondary trade market, or somebody becomes available, or something that they're just eyeing, in the big picture, talking like future drafts and things like that. But it is something that I've noticed when you watch this team play. It doesn't really change. And I guess, like you said, continuity, consistency, but like, you do need to have, some shooting from the perimeter as a big man in this league now. We've seen with a lot of teams.
And Clifford seemed, I guess, a little bit adverse to playing PJ at that stretch five last season.
Mhm.
That those numbers went down. I don't know if significantly is the right word, but they definitely went down. And yeah, I have the same concerns as you. The health, first off, like
Yes.
you mentioned that, like outside of PJ, maybe Rozier, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of durability on this team. And at any moment, a player
Mhm.
can go down for, 20 straight games. And then the backup point guard position, you mentioned that as well. I think Ntilikina is a little bit of a mystery. DSJ, you had a little bit more of a known commodity.
Mhm.
But it's funny, Clifford seems to have a mold of guys that he
Yeah.
likes with his reserve point guards. Somebody with length, somebody that's more defensive minded, able to guard multiple positions. Everything I've heard of Frank Ntilikina, he's a good teammate. I do wonder like how he's going to play offensively. He's very
Mhm.
limited on that end.
Right.
And last season, and I know that the injuries of LaMelo played a role in this, but it feels as if the Hornets relied a little bit too much on Rozier as the
Mhm.
backup point guard,
Yeah.
which has not produced like awesome results. Like he's just not built for that. His
Right.
strengths are off the ball. So I do wonder like if that's the way that they're going to turn again. And I wish they wouldn't. But then you also have to trust Ntilikina on the offensive end as well. I keep going back to it. I wish they would have kept DSJ, but I guess something must have been a non-starter with him with that. But yeah, we will see how that moves forward with them. And I think they need shooting as well. But
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's just a personnel thing, really.
Mhm.
Um, Opposite question here. Like, what is an aspect of this team that maybe gets overlooked by the national media types, or maybe something that gives you a little bit more hope heading into the season?
When you mentioned this and I was kind of preparing and looking at some things, a few names and ideas came to mind. Like I think the fan base and the diehards will see on a daily basis or a nightly basis. I think there's become a big contingent that's in love with Bryce McGowan's. I think that that's like on a large scale, people are not privy of what he's capable of doing as a player. I think that people will learn a lot about him. I think he really fits in and does a lot of things that a good basketball team needs, and he makes winning plays. A lot of coaches say. I think within the fan base, I think that there's been so much talk about the draft class and what should or shouldn't have been done at number two. There's not a lot of talk about Nick Smith Jr. And he's a guy who, coming into last year was projected by a lot of people to be a lottery pick. I know we talked about durability, and it's kind of bad to say it. He had durability issues last year in the 35 game season at Arkansas, but he's a guy who does have lottery talent if he's able to get that part figured out. So I think that's somebody that fans should maybe realize that they might have gotten a steal in this draft and have an opportunity to see. And then the third person that I mentioned or I thought about, and again, I guess it kind of is the durability thing again. Cody Martin barely played last year,
Yeah.
so getting him back, that's kind of like another addition to the roster. Without signing anybody or anything like that, just getting him back in the lineup and seeing what he's able to do. That's another thing that I think doesn't necessarily get acknowledged that much because he missed so much time. It's almost like he's just not there.
Right. Right. And I think some people like forget about Mark Williams for whatever reason.
Mhm.
I've read articles like saying that the Hornets need center help. And you speak of center depth, but like center help, I feel like
Right,
they have nothing at the center position.
right,
And I think because his minutes were so sporadic last season and he didn't play consistently, at least to begin the season, maybe people forgot about him. And he also got injured towards the end of the year, I think with
right.
his like wrist or hand or something like that. But when he came in the fold defensively, like the Hornets defensive stats went up tremendously. They were like bottom five in defense. And then when he came in, it was like, just when he played, it was probably top 15, top half.
Yeah.
And I know that after the All-Star break, probably when he started to pick up some things, I think the Hornets were like sixth or seventh in the NBA on
Mhm.
defense. So there seems to be a strong correlation between his presence and the way that he got more comfortable on that end of the court. And this team did play a ton better on that end. So, it's not just the rim defense too, because I've noticed that he's a little bit more agile than I would have,
Right.
anticipated coming out of Duke. So Mark Williams is a name that I think we need to bring up as well.
Absolutely. I think one thing about him, especially, it's only going to get better. It's really hard to play as a rookie, and it's really hard to play defense as a rookie, but especially at the five position. So it's only going to get easier for him. He's going to learn, you know, pick and roll schemes, the ins and outs of just how to impose his physicality, his verticality as a rim protector, all those things are going to get better. And with more consistency, as we talked about earlier, knowing, okay, day one, I'm the starting guy on this team. I don't have to worry about looking over my shoulder, somebody coming to get me or who I'm playing behind. I think it's going to do a lot for his confidence next year, too.
I actually put out my preferred starters, not necessarily like a prediction, about 2 months ago on Twitter
Hmm.
of Ball, Rozier, Bridges, PJ, and Mark Williams.
Hmm.
If you were Cliff, like, would those be your five, or would you have a different starting five, or does it really matter all that much?
I'm curious I wonder about Gordon and getting
Yeah,
him in
yeah,
the
yeah.
starting five. But at the same time, do you ask Miles to like ease back in, or are you? And I guess maybe the decision is made for yourself if he's suspended for the first 10 or whatever games of the season, and then he just comes off the bench anyway, and you figure it out. Or are you just kind of having Gordon kind of be that super sub guy who can be that? I think Starting him, though, gives you a little more variance with Brandon Miller coming off the bench. Maybe he can kind of be an understudy, so to speak. And then you can see what you have with him, and it puts less pressure on Brandon Miller to be ready right away, which I think people are. I think that's why people are so critical of him, which I understand. He's a number 2 pick, but it
Right.
takes time. So I'm curious about that. And the other question would be, or do you have the same discussion about PJ coming off the bench? But I think I like the same thing. I think maybe starting Gordon Hayward and PJ Washington in the front court with Mark Williams. I like that. I think that's maybe what I'm expecting to see. But once Miles Bridges is back active and then maybe back kind of having his feet under him, I could see them making some changes. And who knows what the roster looks like, 20 games in the year, and after trade deadline, it could make things way different.
Right. Yeah, I think the real reason I had Gordon coming off the bench, not because I don't think he's like not starter material,
Yeah,
like he could
yeah,
start on this team real easily, but I think with his injury history and just
that's
maybe
fair.
lessening his load a little bit.
It's more than fair.
And I think I mentioned before about Rozier maybe being the backup point guard. You want a little bit more playmaking, and I think Gordon
That's
Hayward
true.
provides that with the backup
That's
rotation.
true.
And I think a lot of people are clamoring for Brandon Miller to start as the number 2 overall pick, but I personally don't see it, at least not in the first, couple months of the season. How much of a role do you see with him getting, in his rookie season, and know when do you start to see maybe those minutes get a little bit of an uptick?
It's going to take some time, and I think that anybody that can kind of look at it with I guess a little bigger picture in mind knows that. One thing that encourages me about him is that he was able to show flashes during summer league, and that was without a player of LaMelo Ball's caliber next to him. So when he gets to play against NBA level, all NBA level playmaking, I think it's going to make him look much better, and it's going to make him look exactly how the team envisioned him looking. I do think it'll be ups and downs to start, but I do think that, around that 40, 50 game mark of the year, we'll really get a good idea of what he's going to be. I expect him to have an all NBA, all rookie caliber season this year. I think he's going to show some big flashes. I think he's going to have some big scoring performances, have some games where he can be that knockdown shooter and really just benefit off the playmaking of LaMelo Ball. So I'm actually really excited about what he's able to do. I think a lot of people who talk down on the pick, and I understand the allure of Scoot Henderson, but I think that he's going to show exactly why the Hornets decided to draft him. He's going to have some moments this season.
I'm gonna cut out that all rookie and keep the all NBA in there. That's your prediction. Yeah. Third team or second team, Gil?
Yeah, depending on the voters, depending what the voters think.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if they'll ever get close to like 28, 29, 30 minutes per game. I mean, maybe, but I kind of see it more towards like the 24, 25, 26
Yeah.
range. And like, I think at the impact that I'm looking at for him, and they're different players, but like last season with Matherin, like,
Mhm.
Matherin was really, really good last season.
Yeah.
And, they're different players. Like he has the ball in his hands a little bit more. You'd expect Miller to be a better 3-point shooter. But if you
Yep.
got that same kind of impact, give or take, I feel like that'd be a successful season for Brandon.
Yeah, I think that's important for young players. Simplify the game for them, right? Like if you know you're coming off the bench, you know you're going to get your 15, 20, 25 minutes, whatever it is, and know that in that time you're expected to shoot when you're open, run the floor. You have a guy who's going to hit you every time that you're open. I think that makes the game much easier for him on offense, and I think he can learn and really grow into that potential he has because he does have a lot of potential on the defensive end as well.
All right, I got to get your thoughts on Rozier. I think part of the reason why it may be hard for Miller to get significant minutes this season is because of Terry. He
Yeah.
signed for 3 more seasons at about what, 24, 25 million
Mhm.
dollars, and he's been with the team for 3, 4 years, heading into his like I don't know if it's 4th season or 5th season. I can't remember, but you know, I think he's a very divisive player among Hornets community. I think some people really like his impact as a shooter. But what do you think of him as a player? What do you think of him as a fit with this team next to LaMelo? Do you have strong feelings about Rozier and if he's really worth that contract?
I think the contract, given the production, I think it makes sense. I think it's interesting because a lot of times we think about the figure and not necessarily the market. For him, I think he's the perfect example of that. I've seen him at his best with this team. I think honestly, it feels like we're nearing the end of the marriage between the two parties. It's a reason that he's been mentioned a lot of times at trade deadline. a lot of contenders would want a player of that caliber. A guy who's played in big games. Played in big moments in the postseason during his time with Boston. Um, so it does kind of feel like we're nearing that, but it does seem like, by all accounts, and just by looking at the chemistry and the body language between him and the team, there's a good fit and a really good locker room element of him, and a good relationship between him and LaMelo specifically. But I do think at some point there's probably going to be a time in which it'll be in the best interest of both parties for the young guys to be able to grow and kind of grow out of the roles that they are already in. And honestly, for him to find a situation to maybe have a hand in a team competing for something bigger than the Hornets are competing for right now. So it feels like that, but I don't know necessarily if that's what they want right now, because like you said, by all accounts, it seems like he loves being here and loves playing here.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's a guy, to your point, that probably would benefit from better talent around him.
Yeah,
And with the Hornets being so unhealthy, when one or two players go down, his impact goes down as well.
absolutely.
Last question about the Hornets. Give me a player on this roster, whether it's a starter, whether it's someone lower on the pecking order, that really needs to take a step forward this season for the Hornets to fully be successful and kind of reach their potential.
It's interesting because at first when I thought about guys who need to step forward, I'm thinking of guys who need to step forward just for their NBA careers. And I think that James Bouknight's a guy who just needs to step forward. I think anybody would agree that he needs to show something. But I'm actually going to go with Kai Jones. I think that he has a lot of tools. And I think that for a while, everyone's been waiting for him to put together. I think that it's time to kind of show and prove what that's going to be like for him. We saw it, flashes of it when he was at Texas, and we've seen flashes of it with this Hornets team, and also at Summer League. So now it's time to put together, benefit from playing next to the guys that he's playing with, because I think he can be that X factor just given the tools that he has, especially the way the league is trending. I think he could be a guy that allows this team to raise its ceiling a little bit.
Yeah, my answer to this question would be Cody Martin, and you
Okay.
mentioned it towards the beginning of the podcast, like his health. I
Hmm.
am still a little bit unsure of how healthy he actually is. I do
Hmm.
wonder how long it's going to take him to kind of get back to where he was, because he played all of like 7 games last season, and even in those 7 games, like it didn't fully feel like he was back. I mean, he played in the opener, and then that's when he
Hmm.
got injured, and then he came back for I think 6 more games. He's just such a key player in this roster, and you do miss his defensive presence. You
Right.
do miss a little bit of that playmaking that he does provide. And like I said, that second unit needs that playmaking. So I feel as if he is going to get injured again or doesn't really fully come
Hmm.
back. I don't think the Hornets are really going to kind of reach that potential. So that would be my answer for that. But Kai Jones, like, you're still waiting on that guy to pop. And I just
Right.
wonder, I mean, he started basketball kind of at a late age.
Hmm.
I just don't know if he'll ever get there. I've kind of lost a little bit of hope with him. So, all right, let me go through the teams in the East. I just want to do this real quick. I'm going
Okay.
to list off some teams.
Okay.
You just tell me, like, unless there's something like crazy that happens, injuries,
Yeah.
trades, like, tell me which teams are guaranteed to make the playoffs. And then
Okay.
I want to see where like the Hornets fall in this and kind of compare Hornets to some of these other teams. So these
Fair.
first ones are going to be pretty easy. You think Milwaukee is guaranteed to make the playoffs?
Absolutely.
Okay. Heat.
Yes.
Okay, that's 2. Celtics,
Yes.
Sixers,
Yes.
Cavs,
Yes.
Knicks.
Yes.
Okay, that's 6.
Yes.
What about the Hawks?
I would not as strong of a yes, but I'm still leaning towards yes with the Hawks as well.
Okay, so that's 7 teams making
Yeah.
the playoffs in your opinion. What about the Nets? Is there a world where you see them missing the playoffs?
There is a world where I see them missing the playoffs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, then I wouldn't say they're guaranteed. Okay.
I wouldn't say guaranteed, no.
Yeah, and then Pacers.
Not guaranteed, no.
Okay. Okay, so where do you have the Hornets ranked among like the Magic, the Raptors, the Bulls, and the Hornets? Like if you were to rank those 4 teams, Magic, Raptors, Bulls, Hornets, those 4.
I think I have the Bulls clear cut ahead of those teams, just
Okay.
just given the Levine, DeRozan pairing and what we know, and Vucevic, what we know about those guys. Um, the Raptors are a big question mark for me. I think of
Mhm.
all these teams listed, you could argue that Pascal Siakam is the best talent of those teams. But I think the Fred VanVleet departure and just their questions at point guard. I think of those teams, I think the Hornets and Pacers, I think are right there. I think the Raptors are kind of an incomplete just because there's so many question marks. But when I was thinking about this, I kind of had those teams jumbled together. I think the Magic, Pacers, and Hornets are kind of all on that similar timeline. I think the Magic are a little bit ahead of schedule just because of how good Paolo Banchero is.
Yep. Yep.
But I think just, thinking even down to the fact that Tyrese Halliburton and LaMelo Ball are draft classmates, and that they've built a young roster around these guys. The Magic, I think, were better than people realized last year. I think they ended up winning 34, 35 games. So they honestly were kind of right there based on what they were able to do. And Franz Wagner is another really good player. So I think those are the teams that the Hornets are going to be kind of jumbling in. When I think about the teams who were either in the playoffs or the play-in last year, I think the Raptors are the team that made the biggest fall off. And I think that there are a lot of teams are going to be clawing to kind of jump into that spot.
I'd agree with that situation, and I kind of agree with your like top seven, the Nets, the Pacers, the Magic. That's kind of where it gets a little bit iffy. I don't know if those teams are guaranteed to make the playoffs. Obviously, you can only have 8, but yeah, the Raptors and the Hornets. I feel like those two teams are going to be battling it out for like that 11th spot.
Mm-hmm.
To me, like the Wizards and the Pistons are the only two teams that I like. I can confidently say that the Hornets are better than, but
Yep.
they could very well pass the Raptors. They could very well pass, potentially maybe the Pacers or the Magic, but
Yeah.
it's hard to say that on a Hornets podcast, but they're definitely going to be in the top 3. I'm sorry, bottom 3 or bottom 4 in the East, and I don't think that's something that fans are going to be getting used to. I feel like they think that they're going to be competing for a top 8 seed. I don't see it, but maybe something drastic happens. But in your opinion, Hornets aren't making the playoffs. Well, play in, maybe, I guess.
I think that the play-in tournament is a possibility. I think when you look at the lack of success last year, and again, it's almost like sound like a broken record when you talk about just how many injuries this team dealt with last year. We never really got a chance. One, your best players went on the floor, and then these guys had no chemistry when they were on the floor together because they barely played together. So if you can get healthy and get a chance to look at what you've got, I think the biggest focus should be and it's hard as a fan, especially having, the playoff drought that this team is in right now. But if they can take a step in the right direction this year, I think that it's sustainable because of how young the core is. The nucleus is super young. And you have, like I said, a young all-star in LaMelo Ball who's now committed. And that's something we didn't mention this offseason. Big highlight is
Oh, yeah.
LaMelo Ball signing that extension as well. That's probably the biggest win. So keeping him, in Charlotte for the distant future, I think is big because you're building the right direction and showing him that and drafting who we wanted the team to draft. That's how you keep a star and a superstar around here. So I think that's the biggest focus.
Yeah, I can't believe we forgot that as a move this offseason. But I guess it's like future
Yeah,
years. I
right.
guess
It's
you
not
gotta.
it's not in place yet. So
Right, right. All right, we're gonna end on this. I was thinking about some kind of idea to do a draft for the Hornets historical team, but I wanted to kind of add some parameters here. And for those that are listening, you guys can kind of play along. You guys can judge our teams. I think when it's all said and done, Gail, like we're not gonna have the best 10 players for the Hornets
right.
because the rules that I have for this, you got to draft 5 players and you got to have 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a big. And maybe if there's some kind of dispute about the position, we can talk it over before we move on
Fair.
because I want you to establish if it's a guard or a forward
Okay.
or a forward or a big. That way you're not going back and trying to rearrange. But the bigger thing here, you must draft a player that is uniform number, 0 through 9, single digits. Then you've got a player in the 10 to 19 range, a player from 20 to 29, a player from 30 to 39, and then a player 40 plus upwards. So we're going to field a 5-man lineup. Since you're the guest, I will allow you to either take the first pick or you can take the second and third pick as we snake it back around. What would you like to do?
Wow. I'm going to you know what? Well, I'll take the second and third pick as we snake it back around.
Okay. Okay, good. Because I wanted the first pick. Okay. So
Okay.
I feel like
Fair.
there's some strategy to this. And this one player is obviously not the best player in Hornets history. But I think based on the number parameters, maybe the lower numbers are probably a little bit easier to pick for. But I'm going to go with Glenn Rice with my first overall pick. He's, you look at, he's number 41. I just thought the 40s and upwards were going to be very hard to draft. And I'm going to put him down as a forward, which I don't think is really disputable. But,
Yeah.
three-time All-Star for Charlotte. He's got some size, got some strength. He's an awesome shooter. He really shot the ball well from behind the arc here in Charlotte. I think over 40% every single season. I know it was only for 3 seasons,
Mhm.
So that was my strategy. I think the skill could even translate over to today's NBA. He's got the accolades as well. A very, very nice pickup with the number 1 overall pick. Number 41, he feels that. And then the forward position, I've got Glenn Rice with my first overall pick.
That's a great pick, great strategy. So I got to give you a lot of credit there. He was definitely on my big board, so I have to cross him off now. That being said, I will start with the center, again, not greatest player, but arguably the best player to ever wear a Hornets uniform, despite having a short period of time, and that's number 33, Alonzo Mourning. That was my first pick. Thinking about his rim protection, thinking about what he's able to do, the moments that he had, again, short time in a Charlotte Hornets uniform, but just did a lot for the team. And then the second pick, I will actually go into the teens,
Okay.
and I'm gonna go with. I guess I'll go with a forward again. Actually, I'm thinking
Uh,
defense, thinking a little bit of
oh,
playmaking.
no, no. Are
I-
you
I'm
going? Are
going.
you going? You going Mace?
I'm going Anthony Mason.
Man,
I'm going Anthony Mason
that is a good pickup there.
ahead of his
I
time.
was I was looking at him for the teens. He is actually like my favorite player that doesn't get talked about enough here in Charlotte, just because he fills up the box score. Like he's like a walking triple double. And that was a good pick with Morning too. Obviously, we had your dad on, and he was talking about that call that he had in the
Right.
Coliseum back in '93. And yeah, so you've got a center, you've got a forward, and you've got your 30s and your teens off the board. So
Yeah.
let me think about this. I guess there's probably no reason for me to draft in the 30s or the teens because you can't go there.
That's a fair point.
So let me hold off on those. Let me go. I'm going to go with another forward. I'm going to go number 24. I'm going to go Jamal Mashburn. I have an affinity for those late 90s teams. And again, a lot of his years also came in New Orleans. I don't think that necessarily counts towards his like overall perception here in Charlotte, but he was an all-star, albeit, over there in New Orleans, pure score, nice back to the basket game, nice fadeaway, a guy that you can feed when your team needed a basket. And he was a huge reason why the Charlotte Hornets almost made it to the Eastern Conference Finals back in 2001. Very, very good in those playoffs. All right, so this is my third pick as I snake it back around. Okay, I can't draft any more forwards. Okay, let me think here. I'm going to need a big and some guards. All right, I'm going to go. Trying to think about this here. Okay, I'm going to go Kemba Walker.
That makes sense.
Because I need someone in the teens, and I've got 2 players lined up in single digits, so I don't want to hold off on that just to give myself some options. But yeah, obviously he was a player that probably would have been better had he been surrounded by better players. Like when he hit his prime, the
Hmm.
Hornets started to get better. They started to make the playoffs, but then his body started to wear down. He is a guy that leaves the Hornets with a lot of accolades, 3-time All-Star. His last season, he was on the All NBA team like Brandon Miller, according to you, right? All NBA. So, I loved his competitive nature. Like he was undersized, he progressed as a shooter. And like I said, I do wonder how his career could have been different had he been surrounded by better talent, when he was 23, 24, 25, not when he was 27 or 28. So that's my first guard off the board.
It's great. That's a great pick. I was really torn when I said teens just now. I was like, do I say Anthony Mason or Kemba Walker? But I had Anthony Mason higher on my big board,
Me
just
too. Me too.
so to speak. So I need some guards. So I will go in the single digits. It's pretty wild to look through this and see just how loaded the franchise kind of is. Seems like some of the best players who've had the best seasons wore single digit uniforms. But I got to pick with the heart and the brain. I'm going Baron Davis, number one. My favorite player to ever play for the franchise. Ahead of his time, honestly, in the way he played. When you see a lot of these young, athletic guards. A lot of that is the mold that Baron Davis kind of had in the late '90s and early 2000s. So that's a no brainer for me. And then now it gets a little tricky here, especially again with your great pick to go with the 40 plus to start. But I'm going to go with a guard in the 20s who probably wasn't going to be my first pick or first priority here, but got to get one. I'm gonna go Jason Richardson. Is there a debate that he could be the 2 guard, or is that cool?
No, that's probably where I would
Okay,
have had him pegged too. So
okay. Well, we're gonna reunite the We Believe Warriors in this Hornets backcourt.
All right. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. All right. So you've got one pick left, and I've got two pick, and I'll go ahead and finish this off here. Now, see, me drafting a center is going to be difficult because you drafted Morning. I was thinking about Vladi Divac, but I just drafted somebody in the teens, so I probably shot myself in the foot there. And then I can't draft Al Jefferson because I drafted Mashburn. Oh gosh, who's a center? I mean, Emeka Okafor? No, I can't do that either
Yeah,
because
you're
he's
40 plus
50.
already. So what's left? Your single digits?
I got single digits and I've got 30s. Why did I did not I this strategy backfired. I should have
Eldon Campbell's
drafted,
right there.
huh? Oh,
Eldon
Eldon
Campbell's right
Campbell at
there.
5, yeah. I forgot that he actually was 41, I think, for one season with the
And
Hornets. But then I got to draft a guard in the 30s. Man, I didn't even look at the 30s that hard.
that's a no-brainer.
Oh, Dell. Okay, there you go. Okay. So let me. I guess it doesn't matter the order. I'll go Eldon Campbell as my center, and then he's number 5, obviously, and then Del Curry as my guard at number 30. I kind of messed this up. I wish I would have went Vladi Divac and then maybe gone Muggsy Bogues as
Mm,
my point guard in the single digits. I kind of overthought this here, but I still like my team: Glenn Rice, Mashburn, Walker, Eldon Campbell, and Del Curry. Your last pick has to be a forward.
I'm not left with that many options, so I'm gonna go with my guy PJ Brown
Oh, in the 40s. Yep, that's a
in the
good one.
40s, 42.
Yep. Defensive player, good rebounder. Yeah.
That 15 to 17 footer was automatic a lot of times too. So I'll take it.
All right, we'll definitely get our listeners to kind of look at this and to see who made the better draft choices. I wish I would have done some things differently, but yeah, Baron Davis is my favorite player as well. Anthony Mason, like I mentioned, was a guy that I just think underrated among Hornets fans.
Absolutely,
So you took two of my players that I just kind of have a certain affinity for. But thank you so much for joining us,
absolutely.
Gil. Do you want to promote anything you got going on at Sporting News, and you know, go ahead and tell our listeners?
Oh yeah, no, we're over at the Sporting News, covering the FIBA World Cup right now, but throughout the season, we'll be covering the NBA, some Hornet stuff as well. And for those of you, when you finish listening to Buzzbeat, check me out on NBA Sound System Canada, anywhere you can get your podcasts as well. So we'll start back up ahead of the 2023-24 NBA season.
What's the connection with Canada and you?
Interesting. Aside from, simply put, when I started at the Sporting News, we launched NBA.com in Canada. So we
Okay.
run NBA.com in Canada, Australia, India, and some other countries as well. So I've been covering Canada and Toronto Raptors basketball in addition to the Hornets and the rest of the league pretty closely for the last 5+ seasons now.
Oh, very good. Very good.
Yeah,
Well, we appreciate your time. Awesome
absolutely.
insight. Thanks everyone for listening to us again. We will